Blood Lily, Chapter 3. So, Spencer should be down at baggage claim. Chance contorted his tall frame to pull down their bags from the overhead bins while people pushed and nudged their way past him. Lilith sat calmly, content to wait for the tide of people to pass. While straining to grab the last bag, his faded black t-shirt pulled up enough to show a glimpse of color to the right of his navel. "What's the tattoo?" she asked nonchalantly from her comfy seat. He tossed the bag on top of the others and glanced down at her, startled. After quickly tugging at his shirt, he looked around, tight-lipped. "Nothing. Does the line of people ever end?" Another passenger elbowed past him, making him lurch forward over the seats. The growl was almost feral as his hand gripped the armrest so tight his knuckles turned white. "This is goddamn ridiculous!" His typically smooth voice became rough and gravelly. "Sit down and wait for them to pass. Does testosterone poisoning always make you take the path of most resistance?" With a rebellious scowl, he stood straight up in the middle of the aisle. A middle-aged woman with a clueless smile bounced right off his back, making the people behind her stagger like dominoes. While cracking a satisfied grin, he grabbed the bags off the seat and gestured forward. "After you, Sherry." The faint Cajun accent was thicker than usual, his anger bringing it out. Lilith shook her head and hurried out of the seats, flashing an apologetic smile to the line of disgruntled passengers. Without another glance backward, she rushed off the plane. This was going to be a long trip. Chance caught up to her at the gate, but she kept walking. "Well, thanks for waiting, especially after I held back the masses for you." The quiver in his voice was not because he was out of shape. The silence continued as she steered them toward the baggage claim. No glib little comment? When she still didn't answer, he jogged in front of her and stopped. When she moved to the right, he mirrored the motion. She responded by glaring daggers at him and moved to the left, which he mirrored again. "Enough macho crap. If you want to be a stubborn ass, fine, but don't expect me to be all happy fluffy. No one likes planes, especially getting off them. Deal with things like an adult. Hell, you almost knocked that poor lady on her ass." He dropped the bags and held up his hands in surrender. "I officially apologize for being a stubborn ass and succumbing to my testosterone-based alter ego. Truce?" It was a struggle to keep the scowl on her face. Fine, let's go. Spencer's waiting." He didn't move out of her way, though the playful abandon left his face, and his tone deepened. "In all seriousness, Lily, I apologize. Those planes are so damn small and confining. Claustrophobia makes me itch to get the hell out as fast as possible." She smiled softly up at him and patted his stubbled cheek. "Aw, poor guy. Keep your attitude in check. We don't need undue attention. Speaking of which, we really should get to baggage claim. Someone is going to mistake us for a bickering married couple or something." "You should be so lucky." A sudden grin was contagious. It wasn't his usual playful facade, but a genuine smile that made his cheeks dimple a bit. "Well, I'd take a number, but I'm not sure you have any left." Where in the hell is he? Nearly an hour passed with no sign of Spencer, and Chance was getting restless. "Try his cell again." "I tried 3 minutes ago. His phone is going straight to voicemail." Calling again was pointless. He either turned the thing off or the battery is dead. Either way, he's not going to answer. "Well, we have the address to the Madisonville house. Perhaps we should rent a car." "You're right. We can't sit here all day. Plus, I don't want to depend on Spencer to run us around." "You don't like him much, do you?" "What?" The question caught her off guard. "Spencer." Lilith took a second to figure out what to say. "I don't dislike him, but we have conflicting personalities. He's an urban-style art appraiser, and I'm a CSI. Not much in common." "Hey, you could always argue about the value of graffiti in New York City." He chuckled and pushed the luggage trolley toward the car rental lot. The fall air was warmer here, with sweet floral scents on the light breeze. The sun was climbing up the pale blue sky through hazy patches of clouds. She took a moment to soak in the beautiful morning before following him. "Why don't you wait with the bags? I'll be right back." With an agreeable nod from her, he jogged up the steps into the office. She scanned over the bland mixture of economical cars. They were all the same, boxes with wheels and varying shades of bland. Why did people bother buying them? Perhaps for the same reason that people bought identical houses and trending clothes, the overwhelming urge to fit in, blend with the crowd. A sharp chirp from her pocket interrupted the internal rant with a jolt. She fished her phone out and answered without looking at the caller ID, expecting it to be Spencer or Gregor. Yeah. Well, that is no way to answer your phone. What if Bill was calling? Gloria's sweet Spanish-flecked voice made her smile. Bill was a nightmare. I thought you had a higher opinion of me. He looked like the kind of guy that lingers at 18 and under clubs. Gloria's light chuckle rumbled through the phone and pulled another smile to Lilith's lips. Sweetheart, I'm running out of people to fix you up with. Well, that's the best news I've heard all day. Aw, don't crush an old woman's dreams. So how's Florida? Felipe said you had a last-minute convention? Yeah, these damn recertifications. Florida is Florida, humid, crowded, and smells like rotten fish. She suffered a pang of guilt for lying to her best friend, but Gregor was implicitly clear on the rules of what she could and couldn't say. Chance came strolling out of the office, jingling keys with a grin. The loose jeans hung low on his hips, and the faded black t-shirt clung to him as he moved. The sun accented the specks of auburn in his short, tousled hair. She saw why the ladies made such a fuss, but never entertained any delusions. To him, she was only Gregor's daughter and nothing more. He didn't ask questions or show any real interest in her. Their interactions were all charming, anonymous small talk. Fun, but insubstantial. Unlike his lengthy history in the dating world. To each their own. However, the thought occurred to her that she'd never seen him in the sunlight. In 13 years, she'd only seen him under fluorescent bulbs or in the moonlight. It seemed like an odd thing to witness for the first time, and the distraction made her completely miss what Gloria said. I have to go. The hotel shuttle just arrived. All right, I'll expect a full report of your social activities when you return, Bonita. He stopped in front of her with a smile and flashed a curious glance at her phone. Of course, Gloria. You always have dibs on my social life, even if it is on life support. She nodded at him and returned a nervous smile of her own. Well, liven up so I can live vicariously through you. Be safe and call me later. After tucking the phone back in her pocket, she busied herself with picking up a few bags. Sorry, Gloria was checking in to see if I found Mr. Wright on the plane. He ignored the opportunity to poke fun of her, which seemed uncharacteristic, and bowed in a grand gesture. Well, in the meantime, your chariot awaits. She followed him through the rows of cars until he stopped in front of a petite blue Yaris. Please tell me you're joking. Could you have gotten something a little smaller? Hey, don't knock it. Toyotas have great gas mileage. She arched an eyebrow and skeptically stared at him over the low roof. It's a clown car. Do you see a lot of other options here? He sighed and climbed into the front seat. She slipped into the passenger side and busted out laughing. Her knees were touching the dash, but poor Chance had to fold himself in half. His tousled hair brushed the roof, and his face pinched in pain. Oh yeah, this is going to be fun. Speaking of which, do you need me to drive? Oh wait, we could remove the front seat, and you could drive from the back like Hightower in Police Academy. She bit back another laugh as he glared over at her. Hey, don't knock it, she grinned sarcastically. Shove it, princess. He pulled the seat back as far as possible, still not nearly enough to be comfortable, and put the car in drive. Put the address into the GPS and be useful for a change. She flipped him off before focusing on the enormous touchscreen taking up a third of the dash. Seconds later, the robotic voice was leading them south, out of the crowded streets of Knoxville and into the middle of nowhere. They traded work stories for the first half of the trip. He talked about his awkward meathead students at the dojo, and she shared her stupidest criminal award winners. The first prize story involved a little person dying from 2 punctures to the neck. Of course, her liaison with the police, Felipe Alvarez, called her in, thinking it might be a vampire attack. The assailant turned out to be a World of Warcraft-obsessed geek who was best friends with the guy. Apparently, they both read that blood drawn directly from the jugular of a dwarf, mixed with an energy drink, would guarantee success with the ladies. The geek missed the vein on the first attempt, hit on the second, but then couldn't stop the bleeding. Where the hell did people come up with these ideas? Chance was laughing so hard he nearly choked. When they ran out of stories, he flipped on the radio and tuned in to a classic rock station. She stared out the window at minuscule strip malls, aging gas stations, and rolling hills. The leaves were golds, browns, and reds, a cornucopia of colors dotted in among vast, flat expanses of cow pastures and cornfields. Little mom-and-pop stores were fading on the side of the road. along with vegetable stands, hand-painted signs, and crumbling barns. These seemed like all the signatures of fall in the South. Not that she'd know. The sprawling countryside was a whole other planet from Manhattan. However, she understood why Duncan liked coming out here. It was quiet and quaint. He was always a fan of simple pleasures. The one time she remembered her uncle visiting, he'd called New York the concrete jungle. His tone hadn't rung with the shiny, wide-eyed enthusiasm that most visitors had when they used that phrase. For Duncan, the lack of greenery was a drawback, and he was not particularly impressed with Central Park. He called it a pathetic attempt to honor the nature they abolished. They turned off the 4-lane highway, and Chance weaved around tight corners and up hills with boyish glee. It was like some crazy roller coaster. They barely missed tractors and pickups around every bend, which played hell on her nerves. She white-knuckled the door handle and forced herself to focus on the tall trees that lined the road. The view opened to expansive pastures with black and white cows watching them pass by. 5 miles in, they rolled to a stop outside a tan house with a double garage, and Lilith breathed a sigh of relief that they survived. The property sloped down steeply from the front of the house, looking like it was seconds from falling off the face of the earth. The front yard was bare and lifeless, with only a few young trees newly planted near the split-rail fence. A large shed stood closer to the road, bearing the same rusty stars she'd seen on dozens of barns along the way. Disbelief rang in his voice as he stared out the window at the unassuming buildings. His place looked so normal. I was expecting a plantation-style mansion or the Adams family house or something. We sure this is the right place? She double-checked the address with the numbers on the cow mailbox. This is the place. Guess he didn't want to stand out any more than he already would. People in small towns are nosy. I'm sure things are bad enough for humans who don't go to church in this town, much less a guy living alone that only comes out at night. Well, what's the plan? No car in the driveway, Spencer is MIA, and we don't have a key. I somehow doubt that they left the place unlocked. Well, they might have parked in there. The white doors of a 2-car garage dominated the front of the house. Chance shrugged and pulled himself out of the car with a great deal of effort. He groaned in relief and took a moment to stretch before walking up to the huge doors at a casual pace. He peeked in the half-circle windows before jogging over to the passenger side of the car. Nothing. So now what? She glanced around, calculating their exposure. A neighboring single-story house sat across the street, only partially hidden by some large shrubs. On the left, another house was less than a quarter mile down the road. A thick line of trees ran behind the property, but she spotted 1 or 2 neighbors on the hill beyond that still had a view of the house. I think you should go knock on the door. A confused frown pulled at his lips. What? No one is here. What good would that do? She pointed out the neighboring houses discreetly. You can bet at least one of them is watching. All we've done is peek in the garage. If we drive off, I can almost guarantee one of them will call the cops. Knock on the door, wait a few minutes, and then walk back to the car. After that, we'll find a hotel room, take a nap, and eat some food. Our best option is to come back tonight when we're less likely to have an audience. He stared at her for a minute, not bothering to hide his surprise while she glared at him in annoyance. Yes, I'm aware that I have a brain and am pretty damn good at my job. Go. Does your job require you to be a criminal-minded sneak? The words sounded critical, but an unmistakable excitement filled his voice. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. Are you serious? When he still appeared lost, she continued, You do know what I do for a living, right? You work with the cops on crime scenes? The word started as a statement, but ended up sounding more like a question. More accurately, I show up at very particular crime scenes ahead of the CSI team. I decide which investigations I need to manage in-house and which we kick to homicide. Few cops know what I do. I access crime scenes without any trace that might contaminate the evidence or make the other officers ask questions. That means being an exceptionally gifted sneak. A grin crossed his lips. Well, well, I never knew you were so diabolical. I always assumed that you were a squeaky clean, by-the-book type since you work with law enforcement. If I do my job right, I don't have to collaborate with any cops besides Alvarez and Boyd from homicide. Can we please stop playing Career Day? And speaking of law enforcement, you need to go knock on the door before we get to play with Tennessee's finest. He pushed off the car with a conspiratorial grin and strolled back to the double garage, disappearing around the corner. A couple of minutes later, he reappeared, shrugging his shoulders. "Guess he's not home." His voice projected loudly enough for any neighbors with open windows to hear him. Subtle. Before attempting to squeeze back into the car, he death-glared the tiny seat. "Okay, mission accomplished. That should identify us as disappointed visitors. So, oh mighty navigator, do you want to find us a hotel with that thing?" He nodded over at the GPS on the dashboard. "Well, looks like Town and Country out on Highway 411 or the Motor Lodge." "Town and Country. Punch it in, navigator." His enthusiasm was almost contagious. "Are you always this chipper? Because if this is normal chance mode, I think I need more coffee." "Hey, so far this is the first vacation I've ever had." This time his smile was infectious, tiny dimples and all. She couldn't help but grin as the GPS began barking electronic directions. In the back of her mind, she hoped he still considered it a vacation once they figured out what was going on. So far, it didn't appear likely. They pulled into the Town and Country, which turned out to be a dingy, run-down motel. The single-story L-shaped monstrosity sported cement block painted white with a faded blue tin roof. A rusting beast of a dumpster sat in front of the parking lot next to a questionably tilted telephone pole. A vending machine, sun-bleached into oblivion with an out-of-order sign, sat next to the office. They both stayed in the car, contemplating their options as they stared over the cracked paint on each of the 10 red doors. He shifted in his seat as much as the cramped car would allow, which wasn't much, and stared at her. "Okay. We've been shoved into an airplane and then squeezed into this small-ass car. We have to go back to Duncan's tonight, so driving any farther would be pointless. I say we take a room here and go back out to check Duncan's place. If we don't hear from Spencer or Mariah by then, we'll drive to Knoxville and find someplace less likely to kill us while we're sleeping." She chuckled despite herself. "First off, weren't you the one that said this car would be fine?" He flipped her off as she continued. "Secondly, I think you mean rooms. Plural," she amended. All the humor fell from his face and he shook his head. "Oh, hell no. This place is one step from the Bates Motel. No room for prim and proper, Sherry. We'll get a room with 2 twin beds or something, but only one room." She opened her mouth to protest, but the thought of staying in this place by herself sent chills up her spine. Having another person, any person, in the room would make her feel better. They were only staying long enough to nap anyway. She nodded and dug out her wallet to hand him some cash. "All right, we'll share a room this once." She emphasized the last bit, which only made him smile and wink at her. "You say that now." He grabbed the bills, painfully extracted himself from the car, and jogged up to the office. While he was busy getting their room, she stared across the gloomy parking lot and rubbed goosebumps from her arms. She spent most of her time around dead bodies and crime scenes. Still, ever since that alley, she'd had a nagging sense that something was horribly wrong. First Duncan goes missing, then Spencer's incommunicado. What the hell was going on? While sitting in the car, she called Gregor's cell, hoping to leave a message. The standard robot voice answered, reciting the phone number and nothing else. "Spencer didn't show at the airport, so he swung by the house. We'll try again tonight. Until then, we are going to rest at a hotel. I'll call with more later." She didn't want to leave anything too specific. Her father took extreme precautions to brief her on the situation. The least she could do was indulge his paranoia and leave a vague voicemail. As soon as she hung up, Chance emerged from the office. He stopped and turned back to lean in the door as if answering a question. A moment later, he rested an arm across the roof on her side of the car to whisper. His vigilant eyes never left the parking lot, displaying a palpable gravity to the seriousness of his scowl. If she expected some earth-shattering insight, he left her disappointed. "I swear to God, I don't know what the hell that man said to me. I think it was something about guns and a raccoon." She choked back a startled laugh. "Are you sure he said raccoon?" Lilith didn't consider herself a racist person, and she didn't like to make assumptions, but this was the South and well off the beaten path. "He may have said he makes a mean chicken Florentine for all I know." She coughed over her chuckle, and Chance's scowl lifted to a casual smirk. "You're from the South. Can't you interpret the lingo?" He tore his eyes away from the parking lot with an insolent glare. "I'm from Cajun country, Cher. Not whatever the hell country this is." After the laughter subsided, his voice dropped down to business mode. "We have the first room." He nodded at the faded door behind him. "I want to give it a once-over quick. Stay in the car, fiddle with your phone, and I'll come out and grab the bags." He pushed away from the car and cautiously stalked over to the room. Although he appeared carefree as he unlocked the door, she knew he was absorbing all his surroundings because of an undercurrent of tension pulling at every muscle. Once he disappeared inside, she held up her phone, pretending to push buttons, and stared intensely at the door. The minutes passed at a tortuously slow pace. How big could the room be? She had her fingers curled around the door handle when he finally came out. A slight nod as he strolled by, heading for the trunk, told her all was clear. After making a show of putting the phone in her pocket, she opened the door and stepped out of the car. Her rumpled dress pants, wrinkled blouse, and high heels wouldn't cut it. Tonight's mission required something dark and comfortable. A few minutes later, she was staring down a queen-size bed after unloading the car. "I thought you were getting 2 twins." Chance popped his head out of the bathroom. "I tried. All the rooms are single queens." With a nonchalant shrug, he stepped back out of sight. She released a frustrated sigh, feeling exhausted as she scanned the tiny room with increasing despair. The yellowing wallpaper was still intact, with a few exceptions. A 60s-style dresser with plastic wood molding dominated the wall on the right. A petite round table stuffed into the corner by the window left no room for chairs. An ancient TV with actual push buttons stood on the far edge of the dresser. If nothing else, it'd make a hefty self-defense weapon. A horrendous comforter with swirl designs in salmon pink and melon green covered the queen-size bed. Just looking at the thing made her skin itch. Hanging above was a beach scene painted with the same hues. Yay for color coordination. She dropped her aluminum case on the dresser and cracked it open. When Chance walked into the room, all the lights were off and Lilith was leaning over the bed. She held a purple flashlight, meticulously running it over the sheets while sporting stylish orange glasses. "What the hell are you doing?" She glanced over with a frown. "It's a UV light. I'm checking the bed." He strolled up, curiously peering over her shoulder. Checking for what? Blood, urine, saliva, semen. She continued to move the light over the sheets in methodical, sweeping lines. "Why would you even check for that?" His disgust bordered on offended as he backed away. She huffed and glanced up at him. "Maybe you don't care, but I don't want to sleep in a redneck sperm bank, okay?" Chance leaned back against the wall, laughing. "Holy hell, Lily, you sure have a way with words. So what's the verdict? Are we cuddling in the tub?" She glanced up in time to catch him wink suggestively. "You wish." She flicked off the UV and turned on the overhead light. "Surprisingly clean. Either no one ever stays here, or these sheets are new." "I'm betting on option 1. You aren't the ignorance is bliss sort, are you?" "Nope. I always pack a set of flat sheets to sleep on just in case." "How practical." He flopped down on the bed, stretching out with a groan before folding his arms behind his head. The bare bit of skin between his shirt and his jeans revealed a minuscule glimpse of color again. Overcome with burning curiosity, she sat on the bed and made another attempt to wrestle the truth from him. "Come on, what's the tattoo? I won't laugh. Scout's honor." She didn't miss the slight frown on his face. "I told you it's nothing. Just let it go, Lily." "Oh, come on, let me guess." She thought for a minute, ignoring the irritating glare from the other side of the bed. Some bad tribal? No. A band tattoo. Led Zeppelin. Wait. Her lips curled into a sly grin. "The name of a crazy ex-girlfriend. Maybe the one that turned you off normal relationships?" He released an agitated sigh and stared at her, but she could see the shock he was hiding. That last guess had to be right. Knock it off and let it go. Damn, I don't remember you ever being this stubborn with your dad. She held up her hands in surrender. "Fine, don't share. And I've always been this stubborn. You've just never paid attention." He lifted an eyebrow and let out a snort of disbelief. "The car today was the first time we've had a real conversation that wasn't meaningless jokes or discussions about Gregor. Communication is a two-way street." It was her turn to be surprised, not because he was right, but because he'd noticed. "I suppose so." She tried for a relaxed tone, but failed. The lull in conversation stretched into an awkward silence that left her searching for a way out, while he was content to lay there with his eyes closed. In a hasty attempt to escape, she grabbed her suitcase, fished out some clothes, and sauntered off to the bathroom. From the time Gregor asked for her help, Chance started exhibiting odd mood swings. Friendly and genuine one minute, snappy and defensive the next. Maybe the uneasiness was simply the process of getting to know someone that you've known for 13 years. Whatever it was, she was hoping they both found an equilibrium and fast. But first, a shower, she mumbled to herself, and silently prayed that she wouldn't find a crime scene on the other side of the curtain. The shower was cramped, but surprisingly clean. The hot water rained against her face and seemed to wash away the thoughts milling around. Water always had a calming effect on her. If she had any faith in astrology, she'd chalk it up to being a Scorpio. Too bad she'd met plenty of people that didn't fit the star charts. There was no astrological sign that said, "One day you'll be a serial rapist that enjoys seeing the light die in people's eyes. Success will find you today." After throwing on a comfy pair of sleep shorts and tugging on a navy blue tank top, she stepped out of the steam-filled bathroom. She peeked around the corner and saw Chance passed out, fully dressed and twisted up in the sheets. The smooth lines of his face were peaceful and instantly younger. She pulled her wet hair into a loose bun and tiptoed to her side of the bed. Lilith curled around a pillow and let the magic of the shower lull her to sleep. For once, she had no dreams, no nightmares, only blissful, mind-numbing nothingness. A loud, obnoxious ringing startled Lilith out of her deep sleep. She blindly reached for a lamp that wasn't there. Suddenly, she realized this wasn't her room. A drowsy moment of disorientation nearly blossomed into fear before she remembered the motel. It was pitch black, so she fumbled her hand along the wall to find the light switch while she answered the phone. "Lilith? Felipe? Is something wrong? Are Gloria and the kids okay?" "We're fine. Gloria insisted I call and make sure you're still surviving Florida." She would have called herself, but she's forcing Erica to bake cookies for the cheerleaders' fundraiser. Guess baking is better than handcuffing her at this point. "How's the conference going?" Somehow his tone didn't sound genuine, but she was way too tired to point it out. "Doesn't it start till Friday? I'm just getting some rest before the meet and greet tomorrow." She rubbed the sleep out of her eyes and heard a groan next to her. "How's the caseload? Anything interesting?" Beside her, Chance blinked at the bright light of the lamp, groaned again, and rolled off the bed, stumbling in the direction of the bathroom. "I have one case of interest that popped up early this morning." She half listened while she grabbed for the biohazard cooler. Of course the room didn't come with a microwave, so the blood packs were out for now. The stuff was repulsive cold. She grunted something in agreement and dug out 4 of the gel caps. They would hold her over until she found a microwave. Alvarez was still droning on about the case, and she was still half listening, downing the pills in one dry gulp. The rattling of the ancient pipes announced the shower was starting up. "So the place is going to be gutted. About time, I say. That damn pit is a hazard, a haven for squatters and gang members. So when is this conference over? I'm not used to doing the legwork." A deep yawn interrupted her. "Sorry, Alvarez, the trip wore me out. I'm hoping to be back by Sunday. You can't tell how these things will go. I'll keep you posted, and please tell Gloria to stop worrying about me. She has her hands full with Erica anyway. Oh, and if you want me to look at that case, email me the report and the crime scene photos." "You're my girl. Take care, Lily." Alvarez hung up before she could say anything else. She flipped through her messages on her phone, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes. 11 o'clock at night, and all she wanted to do was sleep. The shower stopped while she dug through her suitcase. When the bathroom door opened, releasing a cloud of steam, Chance strolled out with a towel wrapped high around his waist. All his lean muscles glinted with water, and his skin flushed pink beneath an even tan. Lilith quickly glanced down at the comfortable flats in her hand as if they were the most fascinating thing on the planet, not the half-naked man in the room. "So who the hell calls you at 11 o'clock at night?" he growled and shook a second towel through his auburn-flecked hair. "Boyfriend checking up on you?" She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced her sleepy muscles to move. "Alvarez, he wanted advice on a case." She snatched a long-sleeve black t-shirt, a pair of dark jeans, and black shoes before closing her suitcase. "I do typically work nights, so calls aren't that unusual." "Oh." A curious tone filled his voice as he threw the luggage on the bed. "So what's the case?" She stood with an armful of clothes and started for the bathroom, trying to avoid looking in his general direction. "I can't discuss open cases. Protocol." He huffed and rooted around in his bag. "Oh, come on. We're in Tennessee. Besides, what am I going to do? Run screaming to the reporters for a tell-all?" "Good point. Still can't tell you. I was half asleep and didn't pay attention to a word Alvarez said. I'll peek at the files when he gets around to emailing them." He let out a howl of laughter that followed her. "And here I thought you were some perfect computer share. Wow, I'm so disillusioned right now." Hey, before we play Mission Impossible at Duncan's place, we should rustle up some food. She peeked out of the cracked door to see Chance's muscled back leaning over his luggage. The casual t-shirts didn't do him justice. Yeah, good idea. Maybe we can find an all-night diner or something. Hesitantly, she pulled herself away from the door and finished wiggling into her jeans. After packing the car, they grabbed a greasy breakfast with coffee strong enough to burn through linoleum. An hour later, they were back in the clown car, weaving through the dark country roads towards Duncan's house. Chance cut the lights as soon as they turned onto the last street. The car slowed to a crawl, and Lilith scanned the neighboring houses. They were all dark. The night was quiet except for the faint echoes of dogs barking and cows mooing in the distance. They parked the car behind the shed, shielding it from view as much as possible. Okay, I'll go in, check the house, and if it's clear, I'll signal you. Then you can do your thing. He reached for the door handle, but she stopped him with a hand on his arm. I need to go in first. He turned to stare at her in disbelief. Oh, hell no. She sighed and grabbed a hair tie from her pocket. As she pulled up her wild auburn curls into a bun, she fixed him with a stern stare. Look, I get that you have a job to do. However, you would compromise the scene, and I don't exactly have time to teach you the basics of forensics. His hand left the door, and his face became all hard lines. First of all, you don't know this is a scene. Second, I'm sure Spencer and Mariah have done plenty of damage. I promise I'll be careful, but I can't let you in first. Stop right there. Her voice was iron strong and her mouth set in a hard frown. The surprise on his face displayed an unfamiliarity with anyone but Gregor ordering him around. However, she never let anything compromise her work. I know Gregor sent you to keep me safe, but this is me drawing the line. She held up a hand to cut off his protest. I investigate crime scenes every single day without macho backup. My father sent me to do a job too, and I can't do that with you underfoot. I'm going in, you can stand at the door. He glared out the windshield sightlessly, every muscle in his face flexed and strained. His internal battle waged on as he gripped the steering wheel so tight she thought he might rip it out of the car. Finally, he glanced at her, displaying an entire novel of emotions on his face, mostly centered around the pissed-off theme. His voice came out thin and forced. Fine, but you maintain voice contact at all times so I know you're okay. You clear a room, then I move in. You will stay within one room of me at all times. Understood? She nodded in agreement, but he still looked like a powder keg. With a profound sigh, the anger leaked out of his muscles and he slumped back against the seat. When he spoke again, he sounded tired. You're even more stubborn than your father. When he eventually met her eyes, he forced a smile. Chance was all calm business when he hauled himself out of the tiny car. He bent down and pulled something from under the seat. The light from the half-moon, high in the cloudless sky, glinted off the gun in his hand. His eyes scanned the surroundings with calculating scrutiny, a look that screamed security. She waited for his nod of approval and crept out of the car with her aluminum kit. Unlike the macho cops in the movies, he didn't aim the gun to do a sweep around the house. Instead, he held it casually down by his side as he methodically made his way to the front door. Every muscle in his body drew tight, waiting to pounce. She dug in her case, grabbing the lockpick before following him. Mere seconds passed before the front door popped open. She paused long enough to pull on a pair of gloves and slip the booties over her shoes. He gazed down at her feet with an amused smile and shook his head. The land around the house was dry red clay dirt, which was fine as sand. It was unlikely that any dirt tracked in would hold a helpful pattern. Still, this was part of her process, her ritual. She was about to step over the threshold when he held out an arm to stop her. He leaned in close and whispered while he stared into the dark hall. Remember, one room at a time, and keep talking to me, okay? She glanced up at him, and his eyes caught hers for a second with a severe warning in them. Somehow that look finally made her realize she was entering a possibly hostile scene. Until that very moment she hadn't been scared, but now she swallowed the sudden lump in her throat before nodding. Reluctantly, he let her go and pulled the gun up, training it just over her shoulder. Now things felt like a movie. With her stylish orange glasses in place and her UV light clicked on, she stepped into the dark. Her olive eyes scanned over every surface of the entryway. A high table sat to the right of the door with a gilded painting on the wall of a generic country scene. Dried flowers lay in a squat basket next to a set of keys someone tossed carelessly on the corner. They probably belonged to Duncan, so she tucked them in a Ziploc bag. Entryway is clear. I'm stepping into the room on the left. Try not to touch anything in case I need to go back through and dust for prints. She took her search around the corner into a pale blue room. A cheap faux wood desk with a computer monitor dominated the area. Family photos hung from the walls, cluttered the counter, and covered the short shelves on the opposite wall. The Indian-style rug in odd light blue and cream hues was spotless. The whole room had an air of planned chaos, like a staged photo shoot trying too hard to appear used. Any startling revelations yet? He leaned into the doorway, but he was still watching the dark living room in front of him. I don't think he ever used this room. The computer monitor isn't plugged in, and the cabinet is empty. There's nothing here but a ton of family photos. Maybe someone stole the computer. She scanned the computer desk with a calculating stare. No, I see a fragile layer of dust at the base of the computer cabinet, like the door hasn't opened in quite a while. This is all for show. Besides, Duncan hates computers, doesn't trust them. She was standing back up when her eye caught a splash of color. A large family photo hung on the wall near the door. She remembered the photo. 10 years ago, the entire family got together in St. Louis for a reunion. It was a year after her mother died and a few months before her 17th birthday. Duncan, Gregor, and Aaron stood in the center, the three brothers, surrounded by the rest of the family. She'd only met Aaron's son, Michael, the one time, and he wasn't much of a conversationalist. Spencer left the next summer for Scotland to study at the Glasgow School of Art. Mariah and her husband Malachi were married the summer before. Reminiscing wasn't going to solve the case. She needed to keep moving. The smiling face of her uncle gnawed at the back of her mind as she grabbed the case and slipped past Chance, who was still lingering in the doorway. "You gotta give me a little room here." He sidestepped out of the way in response. "Can I close the door to this room since it's clear?" She appreciated the question and nodded. "Sure, use these." She tossed him a pair of gloves before making her way into the living room. She swept her UV light over a big open space with a cluster of couches and chairs closing in around a big screen TV. A Riverstone chimney in the corner, framed in pale lacquered wood, was the inescapable focal point. The wood trim extended across the ceiling to the front door. Rustic. There was nothing noteworthy in the living room, which took her an entire hour to determine. Chance spoke up every minute or two from the hallway, breaking her concentration. He had eyes on her, so she didn't know why he needed to talk about nothing continually. Her skin tingled with irritation by the time she finished. All she could figure out was this room saw more activity than the first one. The couches and chairs appeared worn with use, but clean. Considering Duncan's reluctance to move into the age of modern technology, Mariah and Spencer probably used the big screen TV more than Duncan. She couldn't precisely picture her uncle sitting in a recliner watching American Idol. However, the thought was funny enough to calm her fraying nerves for a moment. She moved on, checking 2 bedrooms that Duncan never used. Sheer curtains were the only defense against the sun, and Duncan needed a light, tight room. Not all vampires developed an allergy to sunlight in their old age. Still, with the archaic ones, like Duncan, it was almost a guarantee and often deadly. At 4:45, she'd found nothing but Duncan's keys. The kitchen and dining room were less than helpful, as well as the 2 bathrooms. She wasn't going to waste her time dusting for prints, not until she found something that stood out. Lilith stared down a flight of stairs leading to the basement as Chance came up behind her. Before he could say anything, she turned around and held up her hand. "Stay here. I'll keep talking. We've been here a while. If someone wanted to attack us, I think they would have made their move by now, don't you?" Her tone left no room for objections. He frowned but stayed silent at the top while she slowly felt her way down the stairs. Logically, she knew turning on the lights would only advertise her presence to Duncan's neighbors. Unfortunately, logic wouldn't banish the looming sense of dread quickly seeping into her bones and making her limbs feel heavy. With determination, she continued without the irrational comfort of light. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, a chill crept along her spine. The air was colder down here, but it wasn't the source of her unease. The air felt unnaturally still, like the entire basement was holding its breath before swallowing her whole. Stray bits of moonlight trailed into the area, not enough to see anything, but enough to be creepy. The tint of her stylish orange glasses only made it worse. She clicked on her UV light to peek into a bathroom on the left before moving into an ample space with a bay window. front half of the house was a basement, but the steep incline of the property made the backside ground level. They frequently used the exterior door near the bay window, according to the red dirt caked into the mat, but it wasn't the only one. Another door leading outside sat at the end of the basement, with faint moonlight seeping through its curtained window. There were also 2 interior doors on the right, most likely bedrooms. She swung her UV light in even lines over the floors and walls, carefully making her way. "Lilith," Chance's voice sounded tentative at the top of the stairs. "I'm fine. Still checking the main room. Stay put. If the stairs are clear, I can wait at the bottom. I don't like this, Lily." Professional pride dominated his voice, which made a certain sense. Not letting a client out of sight was bodyguard rule number 1. "Give me a minute," she replied absently as her flashlight caught sight of something. She switched to her standard flashlight and found a couple of dark drops on top of the well-worn doormat. Blood. More specifically, vampire blood. She followed the faint trail until it disappeared under the door to the first room. Until now, she'd been more concerned about Gregor's hidden agenda than Duncan's safety. The scales were tipping fast. Her heart began to thud in her chest, and she examined the trail, following it back to the doormat. The drops were small and spaced out, something from a minor injury. She had no way to tell how recent it was. Still, someone should have seen it, noticed it. Perhaps that explained why Spencer freaked out when he called Gregor. Admittedly, this was something he would mention to him, so why wouldn't her father pass it on to her? Is that why he sent Chance with her? She was becoming uncomfortable with this secretive side of her father. She'd always trusted him implicitly and never had a reason not to. Lilith forced herself to focus on the evidence in front of her. Worrying about her dad's motives wouldn't help her process the scene. She needed to know if there was more blood and what the trail meant, even if she had limited tools. The problem in her specific line of work was that the usual method of luminol and hydrogen peroxide was useless. The concoction reacts with the iron in hemoglobin to produce a blue glow. However, vampires had a significantly deficient level of hemoglobin, which was the entire reason they needed blood to survive. Exceptions existed, of course. A sample from either a pureblood right after feeding or a half-blood like Chance would react. Still, neither would be as bright as a sample from a human. She crouched down by the outside door and dug some fingerprint dust from her kit. It was a cheery salmon color that sadly reminded her of the comforter in the motel. Still, it was the best choice when working with the low amount of light. She was dusting the powder over the door handle when she suddenly realized it wasn't locked. She stepped back with her blood pounding in her ears. The fingerprint powder tipped over, and the brush clattered to the floor. Panic rose in her chest, knowing something was very, very wrong. That feeling surged over her, leaving her shaking. Chance, the door. The strangled whisper barely escaped her lips as something moved at the end of the room. Her head whipped around, straining to pinpoint the sound of footsteps on the concrete floor. With a shaking hand, she moved her UV light down the long room. Every single muscle in her body screamed, but words only died in her throat. A pale face flashed inches away from her, but before she made sense of it, the side of her head exploded in white-hot pain. Her flashlight flew forward as the world spun on its axis, and her with it. The smell of burning skin and a high-pitched screech rattled angrily through her head. She vaguely heard the glass door shatter as footsteps thundered down the stairs, and her head hit the floor with a sickening crack. Darkness consumed her as someone screamed her name, and then there was nothing. That concludes Chapter 3.